already here. We will be starting in a couple of minutes. Just want to give people time to get in.
We're live on YouTube.
Okay, great. I will go to speaker view. Mm-hmm. Okay, Alan and Paul, you can probably start recording. And I think we should start. Okay. Mm-hmm. Paul, you're recording? Yes. Excellent. It's at the bottom. It's right beside share screen. It's beside share screen. Okay. Okay. Hi, everyone. We've sorted everything out. And we have a goodly audience. So it's time to start. Welcome to this very, very special International Manifesto Group webinar entitled War and the World Majority, Russians Speak. My name is Radhika Desai. I'm the convener of the International Manifesto Group. This Zoom panel has been organized precisely to contribute to breaking the silence in the West on the views of Russians on the conflict over Ukraine, and also on the fast-paced changes that the conflict has induced in Russia, both domestically and in Russia's foreign policy and international role. We are all here on Zoom. The event is also being live streamed on the International Manifesto Group YouTube channel and will be up on the International Manifesto Group website after the event if people want to watch it afterwards. Throughout the event, I would like everyone who is not a speaker to please take a minute to make sure that you are muted. And also, we will be leaving the chat function on. So that, and we hope that everyone who uses it will take the responsibility of keeping the interaction civil and respectful. We are going to have 4 presentations and then a time for question and answer, so you will all be able to put your questions. As Alan Freeman and I, my husband Alan Freeman and I saw on our recent trips to Russia, the debate and discussion in Russia, both about domestic and foreign policy and their interconnection, are wide and deep, and the momentum in the mainstream of the Russian discussions is moving powerfully away from the West and its still lingering neoliberal consensus and neoliberal policy paradigm. The discussion on foreign policy, recovering from the short but sharp shock of the sheer scale and venom of Western hostility, has produced a new term to designate the current of world opinion that Russia is joining as the main gates of the West slam shut thunderously. This term is the term world majority. First coined in discussions we understand at the Higher School of Economics, where 2 of our speakers teach. And the Higher School of Economics has been at the heart of policy debate in post-Soviet Russia. International and domestic questions are naturally, given the depth of the changes involved, deeply intertwined. On the domestic front, some leading questions that Russians are grappling with today include the following. What sort of industrial policy, monetary and fiscal policy, social policy, tax and redistributive policy, and investment policy should Russia now pursue? What influence will Russia's deepening relations with China exert on domestic policy? Is the new economic paradigm that is emerging, is it in any way related to or different, similar to, and how is it similar to and different from that of the Soviet past? Will the economy's great reliance on energy exports continue? And if not, what will replace it? What are the politics behind these debates and opinions? Meanwhile, on the foreign policy front, there are equally pressing questions. How does the world majority as an entity differ from, and how is it similar to the ties that bound the Soviet Union to the third world in the past? How does Russia's new closeness to China, which repairs, by the way, the deep harms to the world that was caused by the tragedy of the Sino-Soviet split, really work? What are the possibilities it offers? What are the challenges that it faces? How does de-dollarization fit into all this? And how do various parts of the world figure in the new thinking about Russia's foreign policy? These are the questions that our very distinguished panel of 4 Russian intellectuals will help us to answer. They will offer us their own thoughts on their own selective mix of these questions. I will introduce each speaker in turn, and each one of them will give us their reflections for about 10 minutes to start off our discussion. Then I'll invite Alan Freeman, who is co-chairing this with me, to make some of his own remarks and give you some information about the International Manifesto Group. And then we will open up for questions and answers. For that, please use the raise hand function, which is at the bottom of your screen, when we come to the time when you can pose questions and answers. Of course, when we do, please keep your remarks very brief and your questions to the point. Now I will introduce the speakers one by one. So our first speaker will be Professor Dmitry Trenin. Professor Trenin is a member of Russia's Foreign and Defense Policy Council. He was the director formerly of the Carnegie Moscow Center, a Russian think tank, until 2022. And he's a former colonel in Russian military intelligence and has served in the Soviet Army and the Russian ground forces for 21 years. So Dmitry, the floor is yours.
Well, Radhika, thank you very much. It is a pleasure and an honor to be with you and my fellow panelists and the audience today on this Sunday afternoon in Moscow and Sunday morning or whatever, wherever you may be in this world. So let me give you a few quick points that I hope will engender a few questions, and we can have a more interactive conversation a little bit later. First about the wider context of the Ukraine conflict. I think it would be correct to see that conflict as part of what we call in Russia the process of the change of the world order. I think a few years ago, the U.S. administration, at that time headed by Donald Trump, came up with a notion of major power rivalry or major power competition. I think this is what we are witnessing today. A world order very seldom, if ever, passes without a fight, without a competition, rivalry, and sometimes, God forbid, hopefully not this time, wars between nations, the more potent nations of the day, the reigning hegemon and the rising powers. So my first point to summarize would be to look at the Ukraine conflict simply as a Russian-Ukrainian affair would be a gross distortion of the reality. We can talk about the details of that later, but let me move on to the second point. My second point is that the start of what is officially called in Russia the special military operation in February 22, in my view, formally ended, or at least actually ended, the first post-Soviet iteration of Russia. This, among other things, signified the final demise of an unprecedented attempt by Russia to integrate itself into something that was bigger than Russia, not controlled by Russia. The aspiration at that time was to be, during the first, certainly during the first 2 decades after the downfall of the Soviet Union, to become friends with the West, to become allies with the United States, to be, again, part of a greater Europe, from the Atlantic to the Urals, or that was the Western phrase. The Russian phrase was from Lisbon to Vladivostok. And to be essentially a third pillar of the global West alongside North America and Europe. And again, for the reasons we can discuss later, this project ended in utter failure. Right now, Russia is massively rethinking its foreign policy. It's made some very important steps in the last 13, 15 months, including the publication at the end of exactly a month ago of the new Russian foreign policy concept that describes Russia as a distinct civilization. This puts an end not only to the 30 years that elapsed since the end of the Soviet Union, Gorbachev's common European home, Yeltsin's partnership and cooperation and alliance with the West, and Putin's greater Europe notions. It, in many ways, reverses the 300 plus years old design by Peter the Great of essentially making Russia part of the Western world. There are very important changes that are going on domestically, and Radhika pointed to some of those things, but I don't have the time to discuss these things, and also I'm not fully qualified to talk about investment policies, industrial policies, and other economic issues. My next point, my third point, would be that the war in Ukraine is only part of a wider conflict between Russia and the West that, again, is formally described in Russia now as a hybrid war. So this is an equivalent of the Cold War under present-day conditions. I myself struggled with the notion of a second Cold War that I saw coming in late February 2014, the Crimea issue. But later I put it to one side and actually opted for the hybrid war notion, because it essentially gives you an impression that this new version of a Cold War is analogous in many ways to the previous one, but is also very different. If we call it a second World War, a second Cold War, we will be, I think, instinctively looking for things that will not happen, and will miss the things that will happen. It's a very different kind of conflict, but analogous in many ways to the Cold War. There are different expectations as to how long this conflict may last. The shortest is 10 years, the longest is 20 plus years. I think I personally, and with those who are expecting this conflict to last 2 decades, maybe more, during which time, and I think this is very important for Russia, Russia is facing the combined West as its adversary. For the first time in Russian history, Russia does not have allies or even neutrals on the Western side of the divide. This is truly phenomenal. For the time being, and the foreign policy concept clearly shows it, this part of the world is being regarded essentially as a house of foes. Again, we're not talking about Western nations as such, or Western culture, Western ways as being seen as adversarial, but rather it's the Western policies, their strategies that are seen as inimical to the Russian Federation. My fourth and penultimate point will be that as another first in Russia's international relations history, there are important powers outside the West that are playing a major role in world politics and in Russia's foreign policy. During the Cold War, Russia fought against the West on the Cold War front, and it also had a confrontation with China. Today, China is Russia's major partner. It's not an ally, and I don't think that a Sino-Russian bloc is likely to emerge. But what we are witnessing is, I've been looking for the word to describe it. The best I've come up with is coalition. So we're dealing with a Sino-Russian coalition to oppose U.S. global hegemony. And this coalition is becoming tighter. At the beginning of the conflict in Ukraine, we saw China being sort of wary, sort of looking at how things will develop. Certainly, President Xi was not briefed in detail by President Putin about his plans when he visited China just a couple of weeks before the start of the special military operation in Ukraine. But over time, I think the Chinese leadership has come to realize that they have a stake in this fight between Russia and the United States and the US-led West. And this stake is much closer to the Russian interest than to the Western interest. Next to China, there's India, another great power, a great power in the making at least, that is increasingly important for Russian foreign policy. China and India are now essentially, in all Russian official papers, are essentially put in the same paragraph in order not to give China precedence over India or the other way around. In fact, it is the countries of the former Soviet Union, China and India, Asia, the Middle East, Africa, and Latin America that are seen as the ingredients, or the ingredients is the wrong word, as the nations that make up this world majority. That is essentially for Russia, the world majority is defined as the nations that refused to take part in the sanctions coalition against Russia. They may take different political steps. They may vote to censure Russia to the United Nations, but the most important thing is how they practically deal with the sanctions issue. So those who have not joined the sanctions coalition are seen as nations that are looking for a more autonomous, more independent foreign policy that is not. It doesn't have to be pro-Russian. As long as you are not anti-Russian, you may be neutral, or as you may be, you may take what the Russian foreign ministry calls constructive attitude toward Moscow, you are in the house of partners rather than in the house of foes. So that, I think, is a very interesting phenomenon. This is not a new bloc forming. This is not Russia and China forming an anti-American, anti-Western bloc, but it is rather the nations of the non-Western part of the world asserting themselves as independent or autonomous actors, pursuing foreign policies that are based on their national interest rather than on the advice that they can get from Washington or other Western capitals. And by the same token, this is not a new non-aligned movement. There's only one bloc in the world, and that's the Western bloc. There's a Sino-Russian coalition, and then next to that coalition, and in fact, Russia sees itself as part of the world majority alongside China. So you have one bloc, and then you have the world majority on the other side. And my final point will be this. From the Russian perspective, the current world order, so much tilted toward the West, so much designed by the West, to the extent that Western nations are have come up with the notion of a rules-based order in which the rules are designed by the West. They are overseen by Western powers, assessed by Western powers. They can be changed by Western powers. So this is not the world order in which Russia and indeed many other countries that comprise the world majority would find hospitable. And what is happening, I think, is the world majority nations, particularly those who are part of the clubs such as BRICS, such as the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, SCO, and some others, who are joining efforts. I understand we're still at a very early stage in that process, building new elements, or rather elements of a new world order. Radhika talked about de-dollarization. So the ambition of some members of BRICS is to come up with a world financial system that is not dependent on any one nation issuing currency, be that the United States, be that anyone else, be that China for that matter. And a global digital, a world digital currency could be one of the answers to the issue of financial dominance of the West. By the same token, these same nations are joining efforts to build security systems covering large swaths of the world. The Shanghai Cooperation Organization that I've mentioned is expanding its membership. Its key member, China, is seeking peace and reconciliation among its partners. And very recently, they came up with a deal. They brokered a deal between Iran and Saudi Arabia, a very important landmark. Russia, for its part, is working alongside Turkey and Iran to bring peace to Syria. The SCO nations are also working on the Afghanistan issue. And then there are many other things where non-Western powers can de facto build a new security regime, de facto or de jure, build new security regimes in various parts of the world, to begin with the Eurasian continent. And very lastly, information. Information in the world is to a large degree dominated by English-speaking media, with headquarters in the United States or in the United Kingdom. Again, most of what, for example, the Indian audiences know about Russia comes through those news outlets that are not friendly to Russia, and they are not coming up with an objective view of Russia. So again, non-Western nations, world majority nations can do much more to inform themselves about what's happening in the non-Western world as well as in the Western world. So those are the three pillars: finance, security, and information, where elements of a new world order are being at least considered, and hopefully they can be built, even as the old order, still dominated by the United States, is still there, although its area of dominance has been diminishing. Let me stop here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dmitry. That was really very thoughtful, and I think prepares the ground very well for the next speakers. So I would like to introduce our next speaker, Dr. Anastasia Alikacheva. Anastasia is Dean, and I should say the youngest Dean, or one of the few very young Deans in Russia. She's the Dean of the Faculty of World Economy and International Affairs at the Higher School of Economics University in Moscow, which many people will know is among the leading homes for important policy discussions in post-Soviet Russia. So Anna, it's an honor to have you here. Please go ahead.
Well, Radhika, thank you very much. I welcome all the participants today. I'm very impressed by the scope of the group. In my presentation, I would like to focus more on the political economy of global majority and how Russia sees this political economy. First of all, when we speak about war here in this context, I would like also to frame it to economic war. And here it's important to stress it, because when we try to analyze de-dollarization moves, new insurance formats, new suggestions that Russia and China, other BRICS countries do make through pure economic perspective, we can it can mislead us very easily, because when we speak about economic war, it's I consider it as a continuation of the policy by the means. So most of economic transformations and shifts that we observe now are driven, at least from Russian perspective, but I think it's very close to Chinese and Indian and African, are driven by political factors. And political economy of Russian relations with global majority is the only playground in external world when Russia now sees lots of proactive opportunities. If we speak about Russian-Western relations, it, in the best case scenario, the damage minimization policy, if we speak from political economic perspective. Moreover, the better and more solid this new political economic ties Russia manages to build and create with global majority, the worse it will be for Western hegemony. That's how Russia officially considers this track. It's considered as a Western hegemony is considered as a threat following new foreign policy concepts that Professor Trenin already mentioned. And that's clearly the focal point where Russia will target its efforts. But Russia sees now this new political economy with two levels of distrust. The first, it's obvious, is distrust to old systems that have discredited themselves by this sanction tsunami, by multiple use of so-called common public goods from globalization as one currency, or easy insurance hubs in London that now are used as mostly as a weapon against Russian economy, and they already have been used as a weapon against Iranian, against Venezuelan economy, and to some extent are already targeted against Chinese, but with some leverage from the other side. On the other hand, we observe a serious lack of trust within global majority. There is no independent infrastructure or networks to cooperate, both hard infrastructure and soft infrastructure. Very often we have very few positive experience in the past and clear lack of honest brokers or intermediaries. At least from the Russian side, Russia has a very limited asset of diasporas inside and not very well managed diaspora outside of the country. That's the challenge. And the emergence or non-emergence of infrastructure, of independent infrastructure for cooperation, to my opinion, it will determine this new international economic order. We can also look at it through the prism of decolonization. If we take a look at decolonization of the 20th century, and if we understand it as a redistribution of control over territories, we see that most of this redistribution led to localization of obligations to new sovereign states in Asia or Africa or Latin America. And the ability to extract significant profits were maintained by metropolis through this new global infrastructure. Moreover, if we take a look back for last 30 to 40 years, actually there have not been attractive alternative to participate in globalization. The alternative was very clear. It was backwardness. At the same time, now it's also popular in Russian discourse too to set the example of Iran, that managed to establish some new, very technologically intense productions, make some great success in some natural sciences, but it's to a very high extent the product of cooperation between Iran and China, and just the participation in globalization through the Chinese shoulder. However, if we speak about this new decolonization, that is now a very popular term in Russian foreign policy discourse, we can speak about localization of income and localization of development capacities, instead of just localization of obligations, this burden of obligations that many developing and underdeveloped countries faced for the last 50 to 70 years. It can be achieved only through the redistribution of control over networks. Not just the complete failure of dollar or euro, but the appearance of a substantial alternative to these dollar or euro-led networks and systems. Practically, it means that Russia expects and Russia hopes to contribute to appearance of new hubs, new logistics, new finance, new centers for certification or standardization, new stock exchanges closer to markets that Russia will cooperate with. So if we sell our diamonds mostly through Belgium right now, and it's permanently under the stress of new package of sanctions, it raises very clear question. If we strategically plan to trade more with BRICS countries, with Asian markets, why shouldn't we not just expect that Belgium will be able to block the new sanction package, but to initiate the appearance of new diamond exchange in Kolkata or in any other, or in the Gulf states, for example. What is also clear, already clear for Russia, that tries to promote this currency exchange in national currencies especially for last 2 years, this new infrastructure within global majority, at least for first years, hopefully first years, it will be much less effective, much less convenient. It can be pretty clumsy compared to this universal global system that we used to rely on. We'll already see from Russia, but probably it will be the coming trend, growth in transaction costs, increasing volatility, the problem of savings, because if one day, and hopefully soon, we fix the problem of national currency exchange, but the idea which currency we use for savings is still there. And all three issues, transaction costs, volatility, and savings, are direct products of this economy of mistrust. That for Russian side definitely shifted the neoliberal model of globalized economy, where Russia tried to get integrated for the last 30 years. This new pretty clumsy system can emerge, but there is one necessary condition to make it real. And I think it can be found through within development agenda. Localization of income, localization of profits, of course, is very important. But the main bonus that can appear here is localization of development capacities. For most of countries in Asia, in Africa, in the Middle East, development is not just an opportunity discourse and wishful think that it would be so nice to have 8% of GDP, but unfortunately this year we had only 4%. This permanent pressure of young and booming population that not just is dreaming or looking for development, it's eager to get into it. It's really a game changer that differs global maturity agenda from the rest of the world agenda, global minority agenda. De facto, what we see, the technological sanctions or the law on chips, this is an attempt to deter the development of other countries. Any restrictions on the diffusion of technologies, de facto, is an artificial retardation of development. And to overcome this, we can even make a bet on clumsy, on new clumsy infrastructure. What Russia can, how Russia can find its place here. Russia, I agree with Professor Trenin that Russia considers itself as a part of world majority, but we have lots of differences with most of its countries. We don't yet feel this imperative of development so keenly. This imperative is not pushed by 40 to 60% of young population. When we travel to Kazakhstan, to Uzbekistan, not speaking about India or not so close countries, this contrast is very obvious. It's very vibrant. It's by many reasons: demographic structure, economic war, sanction pressure. We mostly focus on the firefighting in our economy, and it non-intentionally pushes us towards a bit different rhetorics than most of the global majority leaders. We have a pretty rigid migration policy, and it also makes some limitations here. But speaking about this development agenda, Russia is non-excludable player in global climate, in global energy, in global food equation. Even if we speak some new technological solutions, metals for them are mostly located in Russia. And what is even more important from political point of view, in the market of trust, we are one of the most honest brokers, just because by objective circumstances, the volume of sanctions and their long-lasting nature, they don't imply options for cheating for Russia. And it's very well accepted both in Russia and as we see among our partners in Asia, Africa, and Latin America. When we think on how this new infrastructure can be physically structured, can be physically built, I think that there are a couple of conditions that must be conducted and possible. First, new centers of redistribution. I already mentioned hubs and certifications, the principle that these hubs must be closer to the markets. And not only this, also any options for speculations and arbitrary also have to be closer to consumers. We can't build a new system completely without these side dishes of international economic interactions. And we also have to place these speculation centers closer to the markets, starting with very easily countable issues like gold or diamonds or metals. If we speak about this new house, we have to speak about joint ownership, because the most of the problem with the existing system that Russia faced, that Iran faced, that Venezuela faced, that China is aware of, is this checkpoint effect, that one country can easily cut the part of the network by its power of control of this network pivots. So joint ownership of ports or hubs or representative participation in these new centers that elaborate standards is critically important. Speaking about technological transfer, the more we see attempts to limit technological diffusion of technologies, the more open new centers within global majority must be. If we speak, for example, technological transfers in Africa, of course, both Russia and China and India and the Gulf countries have to contribute to make this technological transfer as fast and as open as possible. There won't be still no option that Africa will choose between only Chinese or only Indian or only Russian or only US technological assistance or help. The same with major Asian powers. Maybe one of the latest points is that we have to reevaluate the importance of services. Russia for last year has a huge trade excess due to exports, and we had lots of problems with import. Now it's mostly getting rebalanced, but we see that it's not the issue of physical trade mostly, it's the issue of supporting services that can limit international economic cooperation better than direct trade bans. Logistics, finance, insurance, information, and data exchange is also the issues to discuss within global majority, to build it on new principles. Because again, and wrapping up, the new system, new infrastructures, new networks that appear within global majority by its nature, by its competing nature, in the short and mid-run period, will be less effective than the previous ones. So the key driver to make them still keep them attractive is to build them on the principles that reduce risks and the level of mistrust for its participants. That's how I would say the best case scenario for Russian political economy within global majority. Of course, many obstacles are on this way, from Russian side, from the side of other participants, from the side of the West. But I wouldn't say that it's undoable. It's very hardly doable. I would stop here.
Thank you very much, Anastasia. That was pretty comprehensive and really brimming with very interesting ideas, and I think a very realistic assessment of the difficulties of creating this new international world order that we are all talking about, but at the same time, as you rightly say, it's not going to be born without some difficulties. So thanks very much. I will now introduce our third speaker, Dr. Saeed Gafurov. Saeed is a Russian scholar, a Marxist economist, Orientalist, and he has also been a bureaucrat and is an opera critic. So he has worked in government, journalism, in the trade union movement, in electoral politics, and is a professor at the Moscow State Linguistic University. So Saeed, please go ahead.
Not that easy thing to remain interesting and be the third in a row. But I will try anyhow. With your kindest permission, I had some problems with connection. I will remove video if you don't mind.
Why don't we try with the video on as much as possible?
All right.
If there are real difficulties, we will ask you to close it. Yeah.
All right. So I don't want to repeat what my highly respected colleagues used to say before me, and I will stress on some different issues. First of all, I want to say that while teaching students or while speaking in public, I always say, please try to avoid what I call political impressionism. What I mean is that the latest developments, the latest things which happen should not be always treated as a general rule that would continue for the world, and that is let us say, a historical law of development of society. Not necessarily. It can be fluctuation. And that is the first thing. The second thing which I want to point is that the general situation, the general changes, the tectonic changes which are going on in the world, and the Ukrainian issue and the Ukrainian conflict are two different questions that should be analyzed separately. And of course, I'm not the right man to speak on the Ukraine because it is my personal war. In 2014, the Kiev putschists on the 2nd of May, when they started to burn the opposition alive in the House of Trading Unions, and among those who killed was my personal friend. And what is most of all, after him, his mother remained, and I have to look at her eyes. And that is why I could not be really objective, but nevertheless, I'll try to do it. And I always say, when we discuss the thing, they say, why do you support the Putin's war? I say, it's not Putin's war, it's my personal war. They killed my friend. They killed my friends in the most cruel way. And they considered it acceptable. And I say they're losing their human nature because when they find, excuses for burning people alive in the House of Trade Unions. I say that the Ukrainian conflict is a class war. The best of the best of the Ukrainian nations, the cream of the cream that Ukrainian soil had ever produced, the miners and metal workers from Donbass started a fierce battle with the declassed and lumpenized people hired by the oligarchy under the flag of the Kiev Putsch. Both sides, the oligarchy and the working class in the Ukraine, have found allies. The allies whom they could find. The Ukrainian oligarchies, and I want to remind you that they are directly appointed oligarchs as governors of the city. For example, the ill-famous Ukrainian banker, probably the richest banker, Kolomoisky, was appointed the governor of Dnipropetrovsk and so on and so forth, directly. They found their allies, and they are the NATO and some other countries, Japan, Australia, but mainly the NATO. The working class had nothing. The metal workers and the miners of Donbass had to find another ally. It happened to be Putin. Well, Putin is our ally, and I say I behave like Stalin and Churchill during the Second World War, when they, in the worst period of war, in 1941, when Germans smashed the Red Army, or Rommel smashed Auchinleck in North Africa, they always say, well, I am fascinated by the fantastic, heroic resistance of, Stalin said, of the British army, and Churchill said on the Russian army. And that's what I say about the Russian army. They are our allies, and I am fascinated by the heroic resistance of the Russian army again in this war, in this conflict against the Ukrainian putschists. I would like to remind you that the civil war started in 2014, and by 2015, the working class of the Ukraine, the metal workers and the miners of Donbass, almost won. And Putin's politics stopped them. Putin stopped selling arms to the Donbass militias. It is a very important thing, because many people didn't know that Russian deliveries of arms and ammunition to the Donbass militias were paid by the real money, in cash and in hard currency, in dollars and euros. And Putin stopped the deliveries of arms, and they signed so-called Minsk agreements, which, as we now know, the side of the oligarchs and their allies from NATO didn't intend to follow. I say that there is real fascism in the Ukraine, and it is according to all the definitions of fascism. First of all, it is direct dictatorship of oligarchy. I mean, they were appointed governors, and for a certain period of time, they were the governors. Then they have very chauvinistic and imperialist elements of financial capital in the Ukraine. And the capital of the Ukraine is the comprador capital, which is dependent on the international, on the Western financial capital. Monopoly capital among the petty bourgeoisie, among the industrialization of the Ukraine created a big number of petty bourgeoisie or declassified people who lost their class nature, and they appeal to peasantry, to artisans, to employees, officials, and in particular to the declassed elements in large city, trying to penetrate also into the working class in the Ukraine. So for me, from my point of view, it is a civil war in the Ukraine where Putin is just an ally on the one side and the NATO is an ally on the other side. And for me, nothing has changed considering this situation since 2015. Lenin, as you know, wanted to transform the imperialist war into the civil war, and these current attempts to transform civil war into imperialist work, just the opposite to Lenin, is wrong way. That is one again. And I always say that the Russians, and when we say we don't mean the Russian army, we mean the resistance in the Ukraine. You should not forget that from refugees in the Ukraine, there are more Ukrainian refugees in Russia than in Europe now. Now maybe,
Okay.
From
Saeed,
this point of view, I have problems with communication. I don't hear you.
Yeah, sorry, Saeed, maybe we should turn off your video for a couple of minutes and then maybe turn it back on.
I don't hear you.
1 second. That's better. If you can you speak now?
Well, I'll try. I removed the video with your permission.
Yes.
And I'm very sorry to say. So we want to say, and we also have a very, I have class consciousness. I believe that in the globalized world, the Ukrainian fascism, many of us believe that fascism is something supernatural. It is like changing the nature of human beings, biological nature. No. You become a fascist because you are engaged in a fascist social relations, but you have no, I would say, horn on your head or third leg. No, nothing. The fascism is a very simple thing. You ban all the communists, or first Communist Party and then all the opposition party. You start direct stormtroopers marching and threatening to hang all the Russians speaking on what they call Gilaka. Gilaka is a branch of a tree. And I think that if they succeed in the Ukraine, if the Ukrainian Nazism survive this conflict, they will use this experience all over the world. We should not be so sure that democracy, that human rights, that anti-fascism is something given us for granted. Nothing like this. It is just the way. And the masters of life tasted a taste of blood, and they know that they landed from Yugoslavia, from Iran, from Iraq, from Libya, and now in the Ukraine, that you can get your goals, achieve your goals through violence, through war. And they started to do it. And we see that this social conflicts in the Western countries, in particular in Europe, with this huge protests, mass protests against the politics of the ruling classes, they, would give an opportunity for the ruling classes to take the Ukrainian fascism experience to Europe or all over the world. And I see it as a very big danger. Of course, there was a big problem. I was against, now we call it reassociation of Crimea with Russia. And there, I can tell you, there was a very short period of time, several days, between the Crimea declared independence from the Ukraine and it joined Russia. And there was a meeting ministerial meeting in Moscow, and I participated in it. And everybody was against, taking Crimea inside Russia because of Ministry of Finance, Central Bank. Everybody were against. Said this complicated thing, not that easy. Let them be independent, and we'll give them money and support Crimea. And so all the people for different economic reasons. And then a very big man, an old man from the administration of the President Putin, stood up and said, "You're wasting your time. It's not a question of economic efficiency. It is a question of security." And the decision has been made. And it was before the 2nd of May in Odessa, because the tragedy. First we said, well, what do they, why do they say that? But in the end, after this tragedy in Odessa, we all know. So the situation is, there are two different questions. The Ukrainian question is a war against Nazism. It is a civil war of the Ukrainian working class against the Ukrainian oligarchy and their paid nationals. The regime in Kiev is by no means democratic. The first decision after the putsch, the first legal thing which they organized after they won in 2014 in February was the dissolution of the Constitutional Court. After that, everything was allowed to the putschs. Of course, we cannot accept it. We are one and the same nations with the Ukrainian, not in the sense like this Russian world, people from the movement Russian world, but no. Nikolai Yanovich Azarov, the last legitimate prime minister of the Ukraine, said that according to the official figures of the Ukrainian government, 58% of the Ukrainian population had close relatives in Russia. We are one and the same nation from this point of view, and we cannot separate us. When we had problems, we found rescue in the Ukraine before 2014. And they were supposed, we must go and help them. It's not the question of Putin. Of course, Putin used this opportunity to settle the water problems in Crimea. But among all the wars, there is one exception, which is, I don't say it is a legitimate war, but it is much more legitimate than all others, water wars. Which people are understandable. Putin found this solution and he did it. And I said, well, all right, we should discuss this question. It is a question of discussion. But nevertheless, the idea is that Nazism in the Ukraine should be ended. People stormtroopers who walk in columns in the streets and threaten to hang all the Russians speaking on Gehilakas, each of them should be imprisoned. That is a minimum required for our common survival, for survival of the humanity, for survival. All right, let me please finish on it. I have a lot of things to speak, but no.
Yeah, I think, Saeed, if perhaps you can wrap up for now, and there will also be opportunity for you to say other things during the question and answer period. So is that okay? I guess so. Okay.
Okay. I'm sorry. Yeah. I'm sorry, Radhika.
No worries. That's fine. It's not your fault at all. It's just a bad connection. Okay. So I will now introduce our final speaker. So first of all, let me thank Saeed very much for his very important remarks, and I think very deeply felt perspective, and also a perspective on a longer term historical perspective and a political perspective on what's happening in the conflict over Ukraine. So I will now introduce our final speaker, Dr. Oliak Barabanov. Oleg is a Russian historian and political scientist. He is also program director at the Valdai International Discussion Club, which is essentially Russia's equivalent of the US Council on Foreign Relations. And he's also a professor at the MGIMO University in Moscow, which is also Russia's premier institution, premier university for training its diplomatic cadre. So Oleg, please go. Oh, and I should say Oleg is an old friend of the IMG and has appeared many times before for us. So Oleg, please go ahead.
Yes, thank you very much, Radhika, for inviting me once again for the International Manifesto Group meeting. I'm very glad always to be here with you. And what I'd like to say is, first of all, the start of the military conflict on 24 February was from my point of view, quite unexpected for the Russian audience, for the Russian experts as well. Because let's remember that previously in 2014, when there were all possibilities for Vladimir Putin to enlarge, let's say, the conflict zone, to enlarge the conflict and to have maybe then major and quick victories in the east of Ukraine, all those possibilities. I'm not speaking about moral choices. This I'm just about cynical political choices speaking now. This political choice, this political opportunity was not taken by Putin. Another point during the military campaign of the second half, let's say, end of summer, autumn 2014, and then beginning 2015, there are major opportunities for the Donetsk militias and other pro-Russian or Russian, who knows, military groups to go ahead and to take Mariupol, then to take other military achievements, and nothing was done there. And there were quite visible rumors within the Russian audience, within the Russian public opinion, and within the Russian expert society, that there was a kind of shadow agreement between the Kremlin oligarchs and Ukrainian oligarchs. Because if we took the industrial map of the Donetsk region, we'll see that in Mariupol, the steel factory, the key steel factory, the huge steel factory, belongs to Rinat Akhmetov, one of the key Ukrainian oligarchs. And in Avdiivka, near Donetsk, he also owned the major coal preparing factory for these steel works. And so the idea of shadow agreements was to leave both Mariupol and Avdiivka in Ukrainian hands, to allow to Rinat Akhmetov to continue to work legally on the Ukrainian side. That was the results of the military campaigns of 2014 and 15. And already then many Russian patriots, many Russian groups in the patriotic part, I use the name patriot and patriotic in the very neutral sense of the word. So this group were already angry on the Kremlin shadow agreements with the Ukrainians. And so nobody expected a military operation. Then 1 year before, in 2021, when the Western intelligence already mentioned that there were a grouping of huge Russian armed forces near the border and so on, and they were expecting that maybe the major conflict would start, nothing happened. And instead of them, there was a kind of diplomatic blackmail from the Russian side, asking for the summit with the new elected US President Joe Biden. And there was a Putin-Biden summit there. And when at the beginning of the 2022, when there were the new Western intelligence reports about Russian military groupings around the border. Nobody expected, in fact, that there will be the real conflict, and many people expected it was a second round of a diplomatic blackmail or something like this. And it's interesting to say that in mid-February 22, me and about 10 other quite prominent, I would say, foreign policy experts in Russia. I'm not saying that myself I'm a prominent expert, but many of others were really prominent, very well-known experts. We decided to ask each other what will be, the war or the peace? And absolutely everybody, 10 prominent experts in foreign policy and defense policy in Russia, said there will be peace, there will be no war. So it was 2 weeks before the start of the military campaign. That's why, from my point of view, this military campaign started on 24 February. Was in that sense not prepared previously, not only for the Russian or general audience, but for the expert circles as well. And I remember the real shock of almost everybody in the morning of 24 February. Many experts, many politicians, so almost nobody expected. And then now it's quite visible that we can say about a kind of misperception or miscalculation of the first stage of the military conflict. Because I suspect that the Kremlin expecting something similar and something easy and quick, similar to Crimea 8 years before. And so there was maybe very bad intelligence gathering from the Russian side on the situation within the Ukrainian army, the situation within the Ukrainian society, the moral strength of the Ukrainian society and Ukrainian army to defend their independence. So it was a huge miscalculation that everybody seen, but nobody took any responsibility for it from the Russian part. There were some rumors that some figures were under house arrest, some KGB figures responsible for Ukrainian operation, that maybe Surkov, one of the key Kremlin ideologists behind Ukraine, was under house arrest, but it was not officially confirmed, and who knows. And anyway, when the military conflict became not an easy repetition of the triumphal march on Crimea, and became a real, very strong, large-scale war conflict. So many people in Russia could see that the army is not quite effective as it should be. And the idea, because the Russian Ministry of Defense was quite active in PR activities and PR management before the military conflict. And also using the examples of Crimea, the examples of Syria, there was a very strong PR activity on the idea how strong is the Russian army, how invincible is the Russian army. And so the idea of the second army of the world was quite diffused in the Russian public opinion. And now maybe the main consequence of the real war conflict now is the dissolution of this legend, of this myth about this second army of the world that is not so strongest as it was shown to the public society. And because of that, all the patriotic circles became angry once again. And there were also, we could see the diplomatic history around the conflict, the negotiations between Russians and Ukrainians, first in Belarus and then in Istanbul. And so many people in the patriotic part of the Russian civil society, they are thinking that with these diplomatic negotiations, the Kremlin is just spoiling the war. So it's very paradoxical situation for them that the Kremlin has started the war, but has no political will to win the war. So, this is quite interesting characteristic of the current military situation, because we don't see the real political win to win the military conflict from the Kremlin side. At least many speakers on the social media from the patriotic part, many military correspondents on the front line are saying exactly this thing. So that's quite a schizophrenic situation for some extent. And maybe the last point about the general Russian public reaction to the military conflict. As far as I can see, the key point of no return, the key cleavage point was not 24 February, because at least as it was done in the Russian television and the Russian media, it was a kind of another long-distance war, like it was in Syria, like it was I don't know where, so nothing special, nothing has changed. But then the key cleavage point, the mobilization at the end of September, because now almost everybody can see that the war conflict could be something personal for his or her family. Also, it's quite interesting that exactly at the end of September, according to official pro-Kremlin sociological polls in Russia, the level of anxiety within the Russian society has raised from about 30 or 35% to about 70%. So twice as much. And in that sense, the society is quite preoccupied. And another point that because of this, it's the official term of the Kremlin PR, the gestures of goodwill. So because of all gestures of goodwill of deploying Russian forces from the Ukrainian territory to the borders, many Russian regions on the border with Ukraine, like Belgorod region, like Bryansk region, like Kursk region, they became at the real front line. And there are many drone attacks or some other attacks from the Ukrainian side to the Russian towns and villages near the border. And the people also thinking that the second strongest army cannot defend them on their own territory, on their own towns and villages, which are absolutely and de jure Russian, which were not the contested part with Ukraine, like the Donetsk region and so on. And that's why the people became anxious and preoccupied. So for the moment, if we can see the state television or the state media, we can see that all is brilliant, but there are many public and patriotic preoccupations behind the lines that I wanted to say. Thanks.
Okay, thanks very much, Oliak. That was also very, I think, a complex analysis of what's going on and how Russians are thinking about the situation at the present time. So thank you very much. Now we will, in a short while, go to questions and answers. But before we do that, Alan Freeman would like to make a few comments and tell you a little bit about the International Manifesto Group. And this will also give everybody some time to think about their questions. So take a few minutes to do that while Alan, you go ahead, please.
Thank you very much. I hope everybody can hear me. Is that okay?
Yeah.
I just want to make one initial remark, which is to commemorate the sad passing of Comrade Chris Matlako, who was the International Secretary of the South African Communist Party, a fighter to the cause of South African freedom, and recently passed away. He was also one of the very first people to sign the International Manifesto. And I think that with that signature was the first time we realized that we actually had the possibility to bring together people from what is now being called the world majority in a unique way and create the forum of the type that that you now see. Now, I'm now going to try and, if I can, I hope this works, shift the tab so as to show you a little bit about what other things we're doing. Doesn't look as if it's as easy as all that. So do bear with me. The first thing I want to show you is something very simple. This is, no, actually, the first thing I want to tell you is this, that we will be adding participants in this seminar to a mailing list that we have. And the consequence of that is that you'll be receiving emails from us about the activities of the International Manifesto Group. You'll be receiving emails about other webinars, about our publications and so on. If you don't want that, then it's very simple. When you first receive an email from us, you just go to the unsubscribe button and leave. But we're mentioning that because it is something which is up to you. The second is, if you want to receive detailed information and take part in what we're doing, what I urge you to do is to sign the manifesto, and that's an option that I'll show you shortly, which you have when you visit the International Manifesto Group. Now, finally, I want to talk, before asking a couple of questions, about the how you can help and how you can contribute to us. So what I'm hoping I'm showing you now is one of our typical videos. It's on YouTube, and at the bottom here where you'll see my little mouse, you'll see a thing saying show more. So I'm going to press that, and what you now see is underneath is a bit of more description of us, and then a number of links, of which one of the most important is the Patreon link, which says how you can donate to us. We have no advertising income, we have no big corporate income, we certainly have no income from any government in the world. Whether that's a good or a bad thing is something we'll leave up to you to decide, but we decided at the beginning we're not going to do that. We're going to rely on money from you, our supporters. We need to do what we do, not a lot of money, not $2,000 US dollars, or we can put that in rubles if you want, but the equivalent in any currency of your choice per month, and we're receiving about 1/3 of that. And the most important thing you can do to help us is to visit one of these links, and above all, we would urge you, if you can make a regular monthly contribution, that stabilizes our finances. What you can also do here is volunteer. Now, that's a very important part of the way we work. We are a self-organized group. If you go to the International Manifesto Group site, which I'm showing you now, and you'll see that here is the option to volunteer. There's a form that you can fill in, do that, and there are many tasks that are needed, and that also gives the opportunity to take part in our decision-making processes. So, for example, suggesting webinars, helping us organize webinars, helping with translation, helping with posting the material that we try to get distributed on our site, and so on. So that's the plug. Now I'm going to ask two questions. And the first is, I'd like to ask the participants what they consider the meaning of the word left wing is.
And the reason I think that's important is that there is now a very strange situation in this new world majority. If one looks below the nations that are part of the world majority into their civil societies, you find that those civil societies are deeply divided, and they're deeply divided between left and right. You have governments such as that of Venezuela, or certainly China, obviously, which are basically socialist in character. Well, I myself would define them as socialists, or China as socialists, but the populations of those countries, particularly, let's say, Brazil or Venezuela, are divided between a right wing and a left wing. So there's an obvious issue which confronts the Russian people, beside which national alliances should be made as part of the multipolar world, or as Chavez called it, the pluripolar world. There is the issue of what relations between civil societies should be established. And this is a very peculiar moment in history, because this is the first time that I would say that the most prominent class forces within the civil societies of the countries such as America have been of the right. That is, those who have been largest or most vociferous in opposing the role that America has played in relation to the war are the followers of Donald Trump. And I think that that has led to a strong belief within Russia, which we encountered, of the feeling that in some sense the natural allies of Russia, or the Russian people in this war, are the forces of the right. And one reads in the West a lot of criticism from right-wing forces, in which there are criticisms of the sacred cows of the left. I mean, one of the favorite targets is so-called wokeism, for example, which I think is mistaken. It's a sad mistake, because it antagonizes the very people that are actual allies of Russia in this war. But I think that underneath that, I should say, by the way, the only experience I know before of overtly right-wing anti-imperialism was actually Cyprus, where the leadership of the struggle for independence from the British was actually a fascist. But that's very rare and unusual. And I think there's a strange, almost like new normalization, which I think will probably come to an end in a very short space of time, in which it appears as if the leading forces are of the right. Now, one of the things that I think encourages that view is a view of who is the left that I think is wrong. I don't think the Democratic Party of America is part of the left. I don't think the Labour Party in Britain is part of the left. I don't think the Social Democratic parties of Europe, those who continually vote money to the war, are of the left. And I don't think they have been of the left since 1914, when they voted money to pay for the war effort, which is to say they abandoned the fundamental goal of the left, which it had been up until then, which is the unity of working peoples worldwide, to which we must add the unity of working peoples and oppressed nations of the world. That is, the world majority really consists of the nations oppressed by imperialism and the working class of the whole world. They abandoned that and said, no, we will prefer to support our government to kill the workers of all other countries that we're at war with. And I think that we are now simply seeing 100 years on the same thing represented in what is called the left. I don't think they are the left. And I think that it's very important, therefore, to redefine what the left actually is, and one of the tasks that I hope we can undertake, without insisting, of course, that the only audience for what we're doing is the left. I think it's important to understand what the left is. And as a commentator has said, of course, I'm not saying that because Grivas happened to be propelled with the connivance of the British in some ways to the leadership of the Cypriot struggle, that the only forces we find in each country are of the right. It's just this very peculiar world situation we're in now requires a rethink.
Okay. Thank you very much for those remarks, Alan, and you mute yourself. Alan.
I will do. I'm trying to.
Yeah. Okay. So I think with those comments, I think I see two further hands. So I'm going to take two further questions from, or at least one, yeah, Yuri and Helena. And then I will ask the panelists to respond to this first round of questions, and then we will take another round or two, depending on how much time we have. I should also say that I have received from the floor 3 questions as well, so that will certainly be round 2. But if there are others, we will take more rounds. So please try to be brief and to the point. Helena, please go ahead.
Yes, good morning. Can you hear me?
Yes.
So I will be short. I will be brief, not short but brief. I was listening to Oleg and Saeed, and my question is, because I have been asking this question myself since the beginning of the war or special military operation in February of last year, why the Putin and his team, his government decided to launch this military attack, and they didn't do it so in 2014, when for all observers with the common sense, it was maybe the best moment, because it would have entailed much less casualties, much fewer deaths on both sides. So this is my question for all participants, if you will.
Great, very, very important one. Thank you, Helena. Yuri, please go ahead.
Thank you, Professor, and great speakers, everybody. My 2 very brief questions, if it's possible, is to the gentleman. I think his name is Saif, the second to last speaker. Does he feel that it's time for the Western left and much of the global left to abandon anti-communist leftism, and does he see a resurgence of that happening in Russia? And I just want the panel's thoughts on the whole Ukraine war, on if they felt that there could have been a different approach as opposed to just a military conflict, because I feel that even though I understand completely why Russia did or felt the need to do what they do and invade Ukraine, but I just feel that at the same time it only has further inflamed pro-NATO views and the reactionary ultra-nationalist Ukrainians who lionize Stepan Bandera. Thank you.
Okay, great. So I think we will take, since there are quite a lot of questions, we will take 3 at a time, as we've just done. So perhaps we will go in the same order as the speakers spoke. So Dmitry, may I request you to first respond to any of the questions that you feel you want to respond to? Dmitry, are you there? You are muted, yeah.
Okay. So
Great.
do you hear me now?
Yes.
Oh, very good. I think that these questions probably are directed more at Oleg, who was giving his thoughts and conjectures about 2014 and 2021 and 2022. It's hard to discuss these matters while we have not heard, and probably will not hear for a long time, from the principal decision maker. But my impression, it's no more than an impression, is that in 2014, the idea was to go for something that could be managed, given the broader relationship with the West. And the thing that could be managed, certainly until the MH17 disaster, the shooting down of the Malaysian airplane, was Crimea. The idea in those days was to continue the relationship with the West. Putin was in no mood, and at that time he had not decided yet that the relationship with the West was leading nowhere. In fact, Russia was so deeply connected to the West, and we see now how difficult the disconnect has been. So he was not planning but something that is happening right now. So that would be my answer to the 2014 question. He was not, essentially the principal decision maker was thinking that Crimea would not upset the barrel of the relationship, but a wider move into Ukraine might unleash precisely those things that were unleashed in 2022 by the special military operation. It's a very interesting question that was raised about Russia's allies, potential allies in the Western world. My own view of that is that, the important thing for Russia, I mean, you only have so much in terms of resources. The issue is where you feel you can most productively use those resources. As I see it, and I think this is in many ways the view that is shared in the Russian leadership, the idea of associating oneself very clearly with one group of, with one part of this political spectrum in the West is not something that would benefit Russia internationally. Moreover, if you look at the Russian leadership itself, they played with, for a long time, since the collapse of the Soviet Union, they played with the idea that the Russian leadership was promoting liberal policies, and they were essentially on the right wing part of the political spectrum, and that their principal task was to build an important middle class in Russia as a political stabilizer. So this present leadership still emerged in the places where they hope today as successors to the Soviet Union, as successors to the Communist Party, but successors that do not show at all, that did not share at all the ideology of their predecessor. So that's my answer to this first question, which I find very, very interesting.
Great. Thank you, Dmitry. Anastasia, would you like to go next?
Well, I agree that these questions are very important and critical. There is a link on the Guardian article, why it took so long. Well, that's many theses could be made here. I would like to continue my political economic frame. Even of course, the issues of existential war are beyond economy, but if we take a look at this layer in 2014, 2013, any backup of Russian relations with global majority was much weaker. And the scope of challenges for Russian economy faced last year was very wide. But if all the same happened in like 8 years ago, it probably it could be doable. At least the war could be much shorter, and it won't lead to such a long-lasting consequences as now Russia and the whole world face. But new development bank of BRICS, 2015. Eurasian Economic Union instead of Custom Union, 2015. From top 10 trade partners in 2013, China ranks first, but with total the share of you at 10%. India is very, very far closer to the 20th rank, and all the rest is the West and Ukraine and the Belarus too. Okay, but it would be probably very hard to how to say, counter-argue to economic advisors or lobbyists who raised these questions 8 years ago. during these 8 years, many resilience tools were implemented within Russian financial system, Russian economic system. I don't mean that like we bought time. No, we lost time to solve these questions for a much lower price. But I think that this economic pivot was important 8 years ago.
Great, thank you, Anastasia. Saeed, would you please, would you like to respond?
Have to, because that was a very nice question from Yuri. If you permit me, I will start with the second question, where about the possibilities of the left to support the Ukrainian working class and communist movement and left movement in general, because all the left parties are banned. Socialist Party is banned, Progressive Socialists is banned. I mean, everybody, not only communists, not only Baratba. But unfortunately, I cannot give an answer because of because they ask us. We work a lot with our comrades who are now in the Ukrainian prison. And the most famous case is Misha and Sasha Konanovich, the brothers who are the leaders of the Komsomol. And I would express my gratitude to the foreign comrades, to the foreign left movements, because they helped quite a lot to take them out of prison when they were tortured. They're now under home arrest. And it was a great and very important influence of the Western left and Western communist movement. But unfortunately, I cannot go into details because they asked us. We are trying to organize assistance to our comrades, but we cannot say in public on the details. And that is special. They asked us not to discuss it in public. For example, we hope that we could put them in the list of exchanges between Russia and the Ukraine, but until the Russian, we got the support from the Russian government, but not government, but all this ombudsman, you know, human rights protectors, but the Ukrainians, it is difficult to deal with them. So with your permission, I will not go into details, but we work a lot and we are really very, very grateful for assistance of our Western comrades. And as for the first question, I would say, I mean, why Putin didn't start the war in 2015 or 2014 when he had all the legal rights, because the legitimate president of the Ukraine, Viktor Yanukovych, asked for the military support. The answer is cynical. Why should he have done this? Yeah, because, I mean, I always say, well, I have all the respect for Putin. He is our ally, and I'm fascinated by their struggle, but they are not us. They're looking for their own solution. The Russian regime, well, it is not horrible at all. I mean, the only thing what you should do is not to take money from abroad, and then you can say almost everything. I mean, not Russian nationalism, of course, and once, you know, I spoke to a very important man. Unfortunately, late man, he died, Sisan Nagorny, who was a hawk as me. And we demanded we tried to press the Russian government to join the war in 2015. And he was with me and he was very upset. But he told me, please say, don't forget that the president is the most informed man in Russia, in the country. So he had some information, as far as I understood him. I cannot ask him now what he meant, but I feel that he said that there were certain reasons which very important, which didn't allow Putin in 2014 or 2015 to do it. And the situation has changed, and Putin's reaction to start the special military operation was based on the changes in the international situation. And I'm sure, I mean, Oleg is my very good friend and I respect him, but I disagree with him on one thing. The Russians never thought that the Ukrainian army is a weak army. More than that, since the dissolution of the Soviet Union, the Ukrainian army was stronger than the Russian army, much stronger. And now we see that they are very strong, though. And as far as I understand, the Russian idea is the attrition war, because I have already quoted Nikolai Ivanovich Azarov, the last prime minister of the Ukraine. He said that in the European Union, in the International Monetary Fund, they agreed to continue to finance the Kiev regime until the end of this financial year, and not more. That is his inside information, and he's a very important man. And that's why I think that there are a lot of people who hope for the attrition war, that the Nazi in Kiev would surrender when the West stopped financing them, because the country is already bankrupt, I mean the Ukraine. Thank you.
Thanks, Saeed. And finally, would you please? Oh, sorry. Yeah, Oliak, would you want to respond to any of the questions?
Yeah, with pleasure. Halina, thank you for your question. And you remember that just at the beginning of the war, that we both participated at the International Manifesto Group meeting, or it was just before the war. I don't remember already, Radhika, but I think it was after the start. And already then I was saying how unexpected the start of the war was for the Russian society. But it's a quite interesting question because why it was not done in 2014 and was done in 2022. For the 2014, so I tried to explain all these shadow agreements among the oligarchs, and I also totally agree with what Dmitry Trenin has said about the idea not to stop all the relations with the West, because as far as I can understand personally, Putin has, or at least had, a very strong idea to be welcome in the West, to be among the Western leaders, to sit with them at the same table and to decide all the global affairs, like Stalin decided with Churchill and Roosevelt and so on. So that's why. And why it was done in 2022, when all the situation has changed. I think it could be quite interesting psychological also case about the decision making of the leader who is not connected to the flowing of real information. Because maybe because of COVID pandemics, that the personal offline connections of Putin with everybody other was much more limited, and everybody who is expecting to meet him personally had and has until now to be for 2 weeks lockdown. And so it's not quite easy to enter his office, also for his close entourage. And also many people in Russia were saying that he is in a bunker for the COVID pandemics. But being in this bunker, both physically and metaphorically, so being disconnected from the real flow of information, and maybe imagining within his head. So now is the time for my major, greatest victory to remain in history. because it's another point for me quite important for him to be in history, to remain in history, and he did it for now. But so that was maybe not how he's expected to do, to remain in history, not positively but negatively, but he did it now. But so all this idea, I mean, the disconnection from all the information and substituting by personal images of the real situation could explain this. That's why I say that the question is psychological. Maybe in the future, some body of psychologists could write this book about this. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. So we are certainly running short of time now. Anastasia already is having to leave. I see there are 6 questions with people having raised hands, and I have 4 other questions that were sent to me in writing. I think we will probably have time for one round, which I hope will consist of the first 2 people I see, Morrigan Johnson and John Darling, and I will give the first 2 questions I have received in writing, and we will have a last round of responses, and we won't have time for the rest, but I hope that we will be holding other such discussions in the near future. So having said that, can I please ask Morrigan to briefly state your question?
Hello, everyone. I'll be really brief. I was wondering about the attraction of a new economic system that hinges upon reducing risk that was mentioned earlier. However, many neoliberal nations and states around the world might not understand yet or even see the risk in a very narrow way of thinking. So how can you help us understand the international politics that are a factor which might wreak chaos and volatility on the international economic system, and how the survival of nations and states hinges upon the new international arrangements and new international forms that are emerging? Thank you so much.
Thanks, Morrigan. And John Darling, please go ahead.
Okay, fine, you can hear me.
Yes.
Well, this has been a very interesting discussion, but it's all at sort of like 10,000 feet. And we're trying to do events, whereas we should be up about 40,000 feet to get to realize that the major players in this whole drama, which is seeing the defeat of the Ukraine and the slaughter of its population. I heard somebody say that they're hoping to win. This is out of the question. Ukraine is suffering tremendous losses, and they're going to be wiped out as a society. And the major players are the United States and NATO, and we haven't heard the word NATO yet in this discussion. This is the reality. We've got to go up a little higher and take an overall view. It's truly an international crisis situation, and it's involving nuclear powers, and the whole question of the complete destruction of Ukraine is on the line. So we have to see that it's the NATO drive that's forced Russia into a sort of stalled operation, special operation, where they want to try and prevent the Ukraine becoming another NATO base with supersonic missiles that can reach Moscow in probably less than 5 minutes. And this is a situation that's causing this whole thing. So I'm not going to rant on anymore, but I think that we should take a higher altitude when we're looking at these events, and we should be discussing the United States, Biden, the major force behind this war, and NATO.
Yeah, thank you very much, John. Okay, and I'll quickly read out the first two of the questions that I have from the chat. The first is from Jeff. Jeff asks, is it really possible to have all the different countries and cultures of the world understand each other in a non-biased way until massive changes are made in who delivers the news? That is to say, he's talking about changes in the Western mainstream media. And then since Olia's question was for Anastasia and Anastasia has had to leave, I'm going to read Anna Maria Artner's question. Anna Maria would like to know the opinion of the Russian speakers about the role of classes and imperialism in the Ukraine conflict and the change of the world, as well as in the domestic and foreign policies of Russia today. And particularly to Oleg, Anna Maria asks, what do you think about the shelling of Donbass and killing of more than 10,000 people, including children, by the Ukrainian military since 2014, and the Ukrainian mobilization to attack Donbass and Crimea at the beginning of 2022? So those are the 4 questions. I'm going to give all the speakers in the same order an opportunity to response. So Dmitry, could I please go ahead with you first?
Well, Radhika, I do not think I'm qualified to talk about the new economic system with regard to NATO. Well, I think it was very clearly stated that NATO is fully involved in the war, which is a proxy war between Russia and the US-led West. However, NATO is not a sovereign player. NATO is very much an alliance led and managed by the United States. So for a lot of Russians, during the Cold War and post-Cold War, NATO has been an extension of the United States in Europe. Now I think it's more than just Europe, but that's what it is. Whether it's possible to create better understanding among peoples, absolutely. I think we failed in that mission between Russia and the West. And I think a great opportunity for Europe, for the Euro-Atlantic part of the world was missed. But that's something that has to be discussed in much broader perspective, and we don't have time for that. But particularly among the non-Western nations, and I think I would want to stress that point, the Russians, the Indians, the Chinese, the Persians, the Turks, the Arabs, Latin Americans, Africans, you name it. I think we need to focus more on ourselves. Otherwise, we're all looking at the West, at the United States primarily, and we don't know enough, not just much, but we don't know enough about our neighbors in Eurasia or far neighbors in Africa, Latin America, etc. I think we need to compensate for that lack of knowledge, in fact, lack of interest. We need to have more correspondents reporting from those parts of the world. We need to have an appreciation for example, for Indian politics. Very few people in Russia understand the politics of India, which is a great power, or the intricacies of relations in the Middle East and in Africa, etc. Instead, we're following all the whims of politics in Western Europe, which frankly do not amount to much, because Western Europe has long ceased to be a player. And that refers to NATO. It's not that they have no views, they do, but the decision makers sit on the other side of the Atlantic, and that's what counts. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Dmitry. I guess since Anastasia is not here, I will go straight to Saeed. Saeed, would you like to say anything?
Yes, please. I'm sorry for communication. Considering the first question, I would like to say that, may I make a short remark before? It is funny that I wanted to speak about the modern document, programmatic document, the concept of Russian foreign politics, but the colleague spoke before me. But there is one interesting thing worth to know, which is it is a very huge document. It's worth reading, but very big. And they mention all the countries, but they do not mention the Ukraine, not a single time. And the word Ukrainian is mentioned only once when they discuss the United States. So it is very important. That is probably because the concept is a long-term document, so it's not worth it. As for what kind of new economic order, it is rather simple. It is called decolonization, or removing of neo-colonialism, which means actually that speaking from the point of view of political economy, that the rent would remain with the country, with the owners of natural wealth. It is a very important thing, and I think that is the main concept, which means, for example, I once noticed when a kilo of strawberries, which is a very hard work to plant and to collect and to gather everything, costed less than a cup of beer in a bar, which is absolutely not fair. I mean, I would say capitalism is evil and capitalism is not fair. And this should be changed very much. As for the second question, I want to mention that while we discuss the United States, I always teach my students that in decision-making, a lot of money is not similar to unlimited amount of money. I mean, we don't know for how long the United States and NATO and the IMF can continue to support financially the Ukraine regime. As I told you, Azarov Nikolai Yanovich said that they will stop at the end of this financial year. And this would put an end to the whole story, because the majority of the Ukrainian people are against the Putin in 2014 and the current Nazi regime. I would like to stress that Russia is fighting not against the Ukrainian people, and that's the lead, but they are fighting for the Ukrainian people who got in a very big trouble and who are terrorized by the Kiev regime. And that is the reality. And so let us be cynical. The Kremlin policy is based on the idea that soon the West would be short of money. They could not allow this. So that is the attrition war, which means the war that the first one who could not support the war financially, he would lose. And that is what I think Russians hope, the Kremlin hopes for. But once again, it is a class struggle, and I spoke about the class struggle. It is the class struggle where the working class, the best of the working class of the Ukraine, miners and metal workers, are fighting against the oligarchy. And that is how it is. Russia, from this point of view, is not a participant of this struggle. It tries to use its advantages, like with water supplies to Crimea and everything. But nevertheless, the basic thing is the class struggle. And don't forget that the class struggle is by definition international. So we cannot say it is Russians against Ukraine. We say the world working class, including European working class, including American working class, are fighting against the globalized capitalism, imperialism, and the masters of life who believe that they can do whatever they want. They're wrong. Thank you.
Thanks. Well said, Saeed. And Oleg, if you would please respond.
Yeah, thank you for the questions. I also would like to raise the question about the class struggle and the class aspects of the Russian society. Now, first of all, our main communist party, the Communist Party of the Russian Federation, which is in the parliament, they are more or less taking the same position as the Kremlin, and also many left-wing observers say that the Communist Party of the Russian Federation is another kind of a simulacrum built by Vladimir Putin to just to show that we have this strong communist tradition. And Saeed knows it much better than me, but I can also say that behind the lines of the Communist Party of the Russian Federation, now we have the growing movement of left activists in Russia. And it's also interesting how the mobilization in Russia could influence the class division within the Russian society. Because before the mobilization and with more or less mild influence of sanctions until now on the general Russian society, many people were thinking that it is not our war, that is not affecting them personally. But now the situation is changing, and many ordinary people start to see that their life became harder in the economic sense because of sanctions, because of rising of prices, and so on. And also they became the real participants in the war through the mobilization and so on. So if you remember the First World War, to the passage from the patriotic euphoria in the Russian society at the start of the war to support the emperor, to support the government against the Germans and so on, the passage from this mood of the public opinion to the really revolutionary class struggle within the larger Russian society, it was necessary to pass for 2, maybe 3 years. And I remember that many mistakes that were done by the Russian government during the First World War, mainly the total, complete distrust to the patriotic civil society, was copying absolutely with the same logic now. And that's why I've just published a month ago an article in one Russian journal, the Free Thought. It was previously the main theoretical journal of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union, Communist, that about war and public distrust to the powers in Russia, based on the examples of the First World War. And those of them who read Russian, I could invite to read this article. And there is also a very short English summary there, because we are absolutely copying, the Kremlin just copying what the Russian government was doing 100 years ago, maybe with the same result, because they are provoking the real class struggle. And the second question addressed to me about the Donbas shelling, yes, that's true, that's all tragic, and maybe the most, or at least one of the most terribly affected victims of this war, of this conflict, is exactly the people of Donetsk and Luhansk regions, because they were, let's say, not supported for 8 years. We already discussed it. They are not effectively defended now, and so what to think for them? Thanks.
Thank you very much, Oleg. I think that we have now passed the 2-hour mark, and I know that there are still many questions, both here with raised hands and in the chat, which I have collected, but I think we will have to end it here for now. We hope very much to bring you the same speakers as well as some other speakers. We're trying to arrange for Russian translations, so we may also bring you Russian speakers who are not fluent in English, but with simultaneous translation. So hopefully this will be the first of many webinars in which we try to cross the divide that has been created in our world. Unfortunately, thanks to the very mainstream media that one of the questions referred to. So thank you very much, first of all, to all the speakers. I think they have given us extremely insightful, thoughtful set of remarks on politics, on economics, on the conflict, on the world situation across the board. And some very, very important things have been said, including about how difficult will be the birth of this new world order. So it's not going to be easy, but at the same time, it is necessary and worthwhile. So thank you very much to the speakers. Thanks to all the people who have attended, listened with so much interest and discussed things so respectfully, which we are really grateful for. And please watch out for our further webinars. We will be advertising them very soon. As Alan said, please visit the website at www.internationalmanifesto.org. Consider reading the manifesto, signing the manifesto, volunteering, and donating. Whatever you can do is great. Join us. And looking forward to seeing many of you at our next webinar. Thank you very much and goodbye. I'm just going to save the live transcript before I turn it off. Where is it? Show captions. Where is the full? Oh, there it is. Okay, so then I will say save the live. Oh, save transcript.